Early September, East Redonda Island in the Straits of Georgia, south coastal British Columbia. We were looking for a site that could become an ecological reserve, an area where plants and animals are protected for research and education.
In this area, trees grow in the Krumholz form. Wind forced the original tree down. Probably the top of this tree is somewhere here underground, already decaying, but the remaining bottom of the tree, of the hemlock, mountain hemlock here, is still rejuvenating from the lowest branches and developing new growth. Well, this tree could be, 500 years old or maybe older.
Inspired by the International Biological Program, British Columbia had passed the Ecological Reserves Act in 1971. At long last, work could begin in earnest to find and protect the endangered habitats of the province. Leading teams of scientists and volunteers in this work was a man who had spent his life fighting to protect nature, Dr. Vladimir Krajina. To begin with, Krajina had divided BC into 12 biogeoclimatic zones, which would guide the systematic selection of the province's reserves. There was an amazing number of environments to choose from. From ocean depths to towering mountain peaks, dripping coastal rainforest to semi-arid regions, vast boglands to rolling ponderosa pine parklands, frigid boreal forest to the Mediterranean-like Gulf of Georgia, glaciers to rich estuaries, and seabird islands to grasslands. The challenge was to find those areas most suitable for reserves in this incredible natural diversity. Most would be chosen because they were simply typical of the ecosystems of a region. Others would have to be protected because they were unique. Possibly, several kinds of natural areas will be extinct in British Columbia before they can be conserved in an ecological reserve. In the midst of the natural beauty and wealth of the province, we began to realize its vulnerability. In many areas, the natural environment is being altered faster than we can learn about it. While this forest may grow again, it will never be the same. Already, a large proportion of BC's natural forested communities have been completely committed to logging. And with the trees goes valuable information about reforesting, forest ecology, and the answers to questions which might be asked in the future. Whether it was clear cuts in the forest, agriculture in the lowlands, the sprawling cities, or drilling rigs in the alpine, immediate action was necessary to save some natural areas on the verge of extinction. The largest ecological reserve in the province is the Gladys Lake Reserve in the Spatsizi Provincial Park in northern BC. Tommy Walker is a witness to many environmental changes here.
When we rode into this country in 1948, there were no roads, there were no trails, and there weren't very many airplanes. The maps were bare, there were no contours on the maps. It was a practically, not unknown, but I mean it was very, very remote. And so nobody came in until roads came in. Then, of course, the non-residents poured in. Well, this, you see, was the mountain that was a very prominent feature of the country. And it was this red rock that gave the name to the country. The Indians would watch, and they'd see the goats roll in it, and they get a red color to the skin, and they said, well, I said, how does it mean red goat? Well, they said, a spore is red, tsitsi is goat, spot, tsitsi. But white man says spat's easy, but it should be spot, tsitsi, which is very much more beautiful than...
That's very interesting.
Spot, easy, spot, easy. We say spat.
In general, the size of a reserve is chosen in relation to what is to be protected. If possible, self-contained ecological systems with natural boundaries are proposed, such as an entire island or watershed. Sometimes a buffer is added around a proposal in case development reaches the reserve's borders.
I think from here, going south, it should maybe follow the highland up and include these lakes in here.
Yes,
Because to split a lake in half isn't natural either.
no, that would be wrong. And I think they should be included fully into the game area.
Okay,
From Spatsizi, we traveled to the orchards of the southern Okanagan and met Pamela Field.
Hello, how are you? It's nice to meet you again. Yes, that's right. And this is Tom Radford. And
How do you do?
you wish to enjoy not only your orchard, but later on the Ecological Reserves.
Oh, I'm so glad. That would be very nice.
Sometimes, concerned citizens come forward to propose an area they know well. Often, you don't need to be a scientist to see when an environment is in trouble.
Mrs. Kamala Fields comes into the history of our ecological reserve through her action, which she started, if I'm correct, 1965, isn't it? That was at least
Oh,
information.
yes, that was the
Maybe
time
even
when...
earlier, but you fenced it 1965.
That's right, yes.
Yes.
No, we fenced it before 1965, but they first gave us the lease on it in 1965. I think
Oh, yes.
we first paid.
No, at
You
least. Oh, yes.
What inspired you to do it?
Well, this was always a very beautiful little hill, and it had such a wide coverage of the flora of this area on it, and we didn't like to see it ruined by being grazed, and overgrazing can just ruin land around here so very fast. And we were also interested to see if some of these things that had been lost from grazing over it would come back. That was really why we wanted it saved.
Companies also recognize the value of ecological reserves. Canadian Forest Products Limited proposed that a tiny island in the Nimkish River become an ecological reserve. On a visit to the island, we talked with company president L.L.G. Bentley and vice president Bert Gale.
In our operation in the Nimkish Valley here, we still had some of the finest Douglas fir timber stands, and in particular, probably the tallest existing Douglas fir trees at this time in British Columbia. This has more historical value than anything else. This one here.
And on a more practical basis, this could be a very good control to say, all right, here's a stand of timber. Let's see what happens over the next 300 or 400 or 500 years. You're going to get some positive growth per acre, and then over a period of time, negative growth. And then take an adjacent stand, absolutely identical to it, that will be logged once, twice, or 3 times over the same amount of time, and say, now this is the growth that we've had per acre of this adjacent area, and do an economic type research comparison. I think this could be very well utilized for that.
The summer's work is over. Now masses of information painstakingly gathered in the field must be formed into proposals to be presented at the annual general meeting of the Ecological Reserves Committee.
What are the major reasons you would like to...
Krajina has been doing this kind of work for 50 years, on 4 continents, in every conceivable environment. He himself was working as a student while the science of ecology was still in its infancy.
To present such ideas right at the annual meeting.
Well, you want the area large enough so that people won't be able to wait around the edge of the reserve and shoot the game as they're coming into the hot springs. Wouldn't like to see any hunting in there at all.
In the whole area. How big is the whole area?
Just over 20,000 acres.
That must be quite a variation of different habitats, which is very good for an ecological reserve.
Access is difficult because you do have to cross rivers to get to the area from the Alaska Highway. I was there for 3 days.
At the annual general meeting, proposals are put before the public, and a committee of foresters, ecologists, geologists, students, teachers, and other resource people. Progress reports are given on earlier proposals. Sometimes, the progress towards establishing a reserve is discouragingly slow, but as ecological reserves are permanent, they must be created with care.
Now, Vice President of the company, Mr. Gale, is here. So may I ask Mr. Gale to say what you would wish to say in this moment. Please come to this place and speak.
Thank you, Dr. Krajina and Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, if you remember a year ago, I was able to be present at our meeting, and I stated then that I hoped very much that by the time 12 months had gone over, that we would be able to say that we're well along our way for these 2 reserves up in the Nimkish. 12 months has gone by, and I can't say that we've quite concluded that. And by the way, this one particular area I think is very good as far as being an ecological reserve is concerned. It's completely an island. And we did find one tree that was 293 feet tall and many others in the 240 to 280 feet class.
Often the most important reserves to be represented, and the most difficult reserves to acquire, are highly productive sites like estuaries, rangeland, or coast forest, as we discovered with Nimkish Island. After 7 years of negotiation, Nimkish Island, with perhaps the tallest trees in Canada, is still not a reserve due to the unresolved question of compensation for the timber to Canadian forest products. The number of reserves to be acquired is related to the number of kinds of natural environments in the province. Sometimes, more than one reserve is proposed in the same environment to plan against natural disasters such as wind, fire, or flood. To meet such requirements, it is necessary to reserve only about 0.5% of the area of the province. Conflicts are avoided, when possible, by choosing sites with difficult access or low resource value. After the annual meeting, All reserve proposals must then be reviewed by various government branches dealing with such resource interests as forestry, mines, parks, and wildlife to ensure minimal conflict. This process usually takes at least 2 years and eliminates 2 out of 3 ecological reserve proposals. Controversial proposals may go before a public inquiry, as in the case of the Sitka proposal on northern Vancouver Island.
What do you personally feel about it?
I'm inclined to the protection rather than towards the logging. I think there's enough of Vancouver Island has already been logged off completely, and some of the areas that you travel through, particularly if you're camping and you're going on holiday with the family, and you see some terrible, devastated areas where there's just no logs left anywhere. You know, no trees, nothing green.
How do you feel about the new proposal?
I don't like it. Not really too much in it for the working man so far, by the looks of it.
Often, the controversy comes down to jobs versus the reserve proposal, short-term financial gains versus maintaining long-term options for mankind. The mayor of Sayward addresses the gathering.
Logging is our main industry, and with 80 to 216 jobs at stake, these options will have a tremendous impact on a community of 465 people.
Roderick Haig Brown, an internationally renowned conservationist and resident of the area, responds.
There will be more work, more permanence, and a much better long-term level of stability in the northern towns than they can possibly hope for from one more just cut and get out operation. One final point I'd make about the Sitka Shoal, or the Sitka area, and that is there is one estuary that we must leave untouched. We cannot boom logs in it. We cannot dump logs in it. We cannot put big works on it. We have damaged already far too many estuaries, and the work of putting them back together again, if indeed it can ever be done, is going to be very costly and very difficult.
Once created, ecological reserves must be protected from man-induced changes. The usual management problems concern dumping, sport vehicles, and domestic grazing animals. Vehicles cause long-lasting damage with their tires, destroying the grass and starting erosion. Too many cattle can destroy important plant species, hence the need to fence some reserves. The 3-person Ecological Reserves unit in Victoria can only protect reserves throughout the province with the understanding and cooperation of a vigilant public.
That needs to be stopped, and I hope that there will be enough courage among politicians, even if they would lose maybe a little of votes, but they should stop that, because if they will not stop it, then they will be blamed, I hope, at least in the future, that they had in their own hands the power to do it, and they did not do it.
The public is allowed to hike, take pictures, and birdwatch in most ecological reserves. However, delicate seabird reserves and a fen near Vernon are closed to the public, except by permit. Scientists are encouraged to use ecological reserves for research, provided that the environment is not significantly altered. At the Drizzle Lake Ecological Reserve on the Queen Charlotte Islands, Dr. Tom Radford has been studying stickleback fish.
One of the advantages of the Charlottes is that many of the watersheds are still as yet undisturbed. So when you're trying to study the morphological differentiation in these stickleback, you know you can go to a lake and find those natural selective processes at present, which were probably present in the past. This fish from one of the lakes has a very strongly developed spines, lateral armor, and we feel this is a response to predation by the cutthroat. This seems to be one of the major food fish on the island. In other places you have, like for example here, no cutthroat at all, and the stickleback have pretty well lost all their spine, and it appears this may be due to predation by an invertebrate, the dragonfly larva, and a ditiscid beetle, where the presence of spines in the stickleback are a disadvantage to the fish, and so natural selection favors a gradual reduction in spine length and eventually a reduction in spine number.
Ecological reserves serve not only as outdoor classrooms and laboratories, but also as repositories of genetic material, in this case, seed stock for new forests. They also serve as benchmarks against which we can measure the vast changes we are making in the environment. At the Sitka hearings, Roderick Haig Brown encouraged us to remember how man formerly lived in harmony with nature.
The Nootka Indian ideal man who was mild, generous, and humorous. And generous is a very comprehensive word. It means generosity to wild life of all kinds, to the forest, to the land, to the rivers, lakes, the sea, everything.
Part of East Redonda Island is now an ecological reserve, one of about 100 similarly protected areas throughout BC. But the work is far from over. Many critical habitats remain endangered. We cannot predict all the sorts of questions ecological reserves will be used to answer in the next 10 or 100 years. What is certain is that without protected natural areas, there will be no way natural ecosystems can be recreated. Once gone, they will become extinct. And without natural areas, it will be impossible to answer many questions of crucial concern to man's survival on this planet.